Beep beep bop. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ba-da-do-do-do-do-do. Do-do-do-do-do-do. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba-ba-boo. Hello. How are you then? Picks of the week. La 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 la. So, good morning. I went to the shop yesterday. It was a very long day. Um, the Los Angeles Metro bus system, not exactly the pride of the city. And it was a balmy 99 degrees in the San Fernando Valley yesterday for the first day of autumn, so I got home late and I was too exhausted to do this. But, and I've also been super broke, but I did get a couple books. First up is Baby Teeth number 20, the final issue. This has been a tremendous book. Donnie Cates and Gary Brown, who are two of my favorite creators. Uh, Don Cates is he was really quite the indie darling there for a minute, and I don't think he's not. And he still has like crossover on Image, and he's still keeping his hand in the indie stuff. But ever since he got a job at Marvel, his Venom run was very well regarded and just ended, and now he's going to be taking over the Hulk, which I'm very excited for. But I very clearly remember this book when it started because I had just moved to Los Angeles, so this would have been like 2017, the summer thereof, and I was at some crappy mic in Hollywood, and my friend Frank, who used to run the comic shop I worked at, he was still getting he's not very active like comic collecting ever since he had to sell the shop, but he still kept he would get preview stuff. So he sent me, he was like, "Hey, this new Donny Cates book. You need to check it out." And I looked at one page and I was like, "Okay, I don't want to look at it anymore." Um, the baby in question is in fact the Antichrist and uh, born to a young mother, possibly a teenager. So I mean, I'm already on board. Gary Brown is an artist that I've known for a very long time, or known of, and now I'm having trouble remembering from where. But he's just got a very, what's the word I want? Very recognizable style. Oh, he didn't fight Ghosts. Oh, did he? I do remember Crude. Yeah, he's just been. I mean, oh, he's drawn X Force now currently. He's a very good artist. I don't know what else to say. Uh, anyway, so that and this is the final issue, obviously. So this is a big build to that. I'm a little fuzzy still. Sorry. Also, this week I got Frontiersman #1 from Image Comics. I don't know anything about this, but I saw this poster in the window of the comic shop a few months ago, and I was like, "Oh, done." I always like when you take a pretty common English word and they're like, "Well, that sounds like a superhero," and then they therefore then make. He also looks like Irving Forbush with a cap over his eyes and with a tail. Irving Forbush was like a became like Marvel's unofficial mascot in the '60s for Not Brand Echh, which was their satire book, their parody book, and he wore a pot over his head with the handle out, and then he had eyes. Um, but that's not. I'm fairly certain that's not what they're going for here. And Warren, the owner down at the shop, told me he'd read some of it. He was really good. I don't. Marco Ferrari, I recognize that name, and I feel like I've probably read something that he's done, but I don't know. And same with Patrick Kindlon, actually, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. But I will report further on that next picks of the week. Da 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 da, and then blah 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 blah. Blah. I've been very little, super busy, and I've had very little reading time. But I did get the two from last week in, as well as like a couple others. It also is a drag. I get paid next week, so I should be able to get like the whole. I've got a bunch of comics in there. Plus, I am also now going to be an employee of Galaxy of Comics again, which will be very helpful financially, especially as far as comics go. But Let's see what I did. Okay, so first off, I read Primordial #1. This was super good, and I feel like a dope, but I had last week compared this to the Manhattan Projects, which there is a point of comparison, but that's about where it ends. Um, Manhattan Projects, for one thing, was much more comedy. Like it wasn't a laugh out loud book. It was pretty dark in times, but most of that book was played for laughs. Again, not belly laughs, but it was definitely very tongue in cheek. Primordial is much more sci-fi thriller, but and also Manhattan Projects had several different kind of storylines, and one of those concerned uh, animals shot in space. There is some overlap with this book, but like I say, it's not. This is much more like there's Manhattan Project's kind of at a point, especially just was like there's aliens, there's time travel, there's all this crazy sci-fi stuff. That's just part of the world we're in. Primordial is much more from a point of this is reality. This is the early '60s. This is the crazy shit that's happening. It also is a bit of an alternate dimension where Manhattan Projects, the base of Manhattan Projects was basic premise was that the Manhattan Project, which created the American, nuclear program, that there were a bunch of other projects going on at the same time, and that's where it gets weird. So that's like the premise is things are a lot weirder than you realize, but and I guess that's a similar. But Primordial is much more like and also that's the other thing is that that's where I was going. Primordial is in an alternate timeline, and it's one of those very well done things where it's subtle, but there's it takes place in the early '60s, which would have been right after they shot those monkeys into space, but where Nixon has become president and not Kennedy. So we'll see where this sort of alternate history goes. But yeah, it's really good. And Lemire and Sorrentino together, you got no complaints. Also, I read Fantastic Four #35. This was super fun. This was exactly what I had hoped. It was slightly different. For one thing, I want to correct. I think I said last week that the Thing briefly wore this full headgear because he had been irradiated further with cosmic radiation and was more freakish. That's I was conflating two. There was an era in the '80s. I think it was during John Byrne's era. It might have even been during Simonson's era, but where the Thing became he did get more cosmically irradiated, but instead of this, he was just spikier and rockier somehow. This era was I don't remember why exactly, but he got into a fight with Wolverine, and Wolverine slashed his face, and so that's why he was wearing it because he had these big scars on top of being a big orange rocky guy. I mean, the obvious reason is just that it looks cool, but yeah, and it wasn't quite like the new Fantastic Four doesn't show up, which was the Hulk, Ghost Rider, Wolverine, and Hulk, Ghost Rider, Wolverine, and the Punisher. No, that can't be right. Spider Man. And like Black Panther and Storm had been the Fantastic Four for a minute, but none of them really show up. The story, and this is a very like a very apt storyline, is four different Kang the Conquerors from different timelines all have to go back into the past and steal from the Fantastic Four uh, a piece of a time machine, or there's it doesn't matter. It's the MacGuffin. They each have to go back into time and fight the Fantastic Four at different eras, at different points in their own timeline. So we get to see the original FF, and then we get to see this era, different eras. Only four though, because even though the cover and the sort of the vibe is like, oh, look at this vast history of the Fantastic Four, which is extremely vast. It's probably, I mean, it's definitely Marvel's longest running superhero book, even though there was like a year there, I want to say like in 2015 where there was no FF at all. which is after that movie bombed again. Every time they try to make a Fantastic Four movie, it bombs. And so the last time they did it, it bombed so hard that the book got canceled. Um, so yeah, it's fun. There was a point where I was like, how come Doctor Doom's not in this? But I remember Doctor Doom had been in the book for like the last arc or two. But yeah, it was great. It was a lot of fun, and I feel like lately that's kind of my like I've been so busy and so kind of distracted that just a single issue like this was like, okay, good. I don't need to know what's going on anymore. I've been really trying to cut back on a lot of stuff, and I've dropped a lot of books that I'm gonna have to kind of go back and get. But also, I kind of realized that was kind of why, like, when I was house sitting last month, I was doing a lot of that. I was catching up on books that I had missed, and I was like, "Oh, I'm really not missing a lot. Like, there's a reason I dropped these." So I feel like I'm still working on that, trying to winnow down my reading stack because it's just getting super huge, and it's like I really need to kind of just focus on the stuff that I really want to read, that I really feel like. And I'm still buying books like Moonshine, which I haven't liked for a long time, but the art is so good that I can't. You know what I mean? That was Pixel last week. This is it's also earlier, and it's 10:15, but I don't want to be all loud. And that's that. Okay.